So this morning, I was thinking maybe I should have had a Thanksgiving theme because we're kind of doing our Thanksgiving already, but I didn't think of that in time, so we'll see. But anyway, we're continuing through Jonah, and as we're looking at this, I feel like maybe these have been some of my most panicked, sloppy messages I've ever preached, just because I panic when I'm like, oh, this is hard, and it's maybe got complicated, and I start, I don't know, maybe I hyperventilate or something, and I start just getting messy and sloppy and like just trying to fly through to make it more interesting or something like that. But I just hope that when we're looking at this, that number one, I'd like when you sit down to read the Bible and you read the Old Testament, I hope that this helps you to learn to see at least how I read the Old Testament, and that it really seems to have like piles and piles of riddles that are kind of little spoken words about faith and little illustrations about faith and things that apply to the New Testament and all these little things that you see. And I think that sometimes what kind of blows my mind is that you end up getting all of these Old Testament pictures, and they all come together with so much meaning that I feel like I can't put it all together, so I just kind of crack. But anyway, I hope that today we're going to look at some of the meaning we find here in Jonah and just see a really easy life application for it. But we've already looked, and some of you who are new to this study that we've been going through, we looked at the story of Jonah and how Jonah says that he's running from the presence of God, and how we remember that Jesus also claims to be coming from the presence of God. How they both are sent to preach to the wicked, and we think, you know, when we see Jonah was sent to preach to the wicked, we remember that Jesus says that he came to preach to the wicked, and he also compares himself to Jonah as being the greater than Jonah, the greater preacher. How both Jonah gets into a boat to go across the sea with others, and the storm comes upon them, and how Jesus gets into a boat to go across the sea with others, and the storm comes upon them. How they're all asking in both scenarios, both in Jonah and Jesus' case, you know, who is God? Who is the real Lord? Who is this person? Things that we learn who Jesus is, how both Jonah and Jesus go down to the inner part of the ship to fall asleep, and how someone goes down in both cases and wakes them up, and they both have the key to calming the storms that are threatening their lives. And as we're looking at these things, we also looked last week at all of the Old Testament places where the Old Testament says that the storming, raging seas are a symbol of this world, and all the life and the raging storms and the loud people and the things that just make our peaceful Christian lives a mess, that one day Jesus will calm all of the world around us that's like crashing waves upon us. And how we looked at how the Old Testament teaches that when we see a raging sea, we can look at it in this way, that it is a raging world around us, that we can learn from the metaphors and the illustrations in the story. So last week we were looking at 11 and 12, and it says as Jonah's in this boat with these people, and they're wondering what to do, how are they going to survive the storm? They think they're going to die, and it says, they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us?" And it says, because it grew more and more tempest. And remember how they said, "What shall we do to you?" Realizing that his death would be the solution for their life. And how this also is always constantly seems to be teaching us of Jesus. And he said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea, that the sea may quiet down for you." He says, "For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." So we see that through Jonah's death, his going into the sea, as Jesus was cast into the sea of wicked mobs, of wicked people for us, as he was crucified, as he was lifted up, Jonah says, "Lift me up and hurl me into the sea that you may live." And we see that this is the gospel message also in the story of Jesus. But as we're looking at this, so maybe you share the story of Jesus with someone. Maybe you tell them, "Listen, Jesus Christ died for you. He shed his blood. He paid for your sin. And if you want to escape this stormy life where there's death and problems and hardship and all of these things, you can turn to Jesus. And you can turn your life to Jesus, and he will bring you into eternity. He will bring you into heaven. He will give you a hope and a place that you can go to." And everybody always says, "Sure, I'll live for Jesus," don't they? No, they don't. That's not always the response, right? Sometimes it takes a lot to get to that point. So when they hear Jonah say, "My sacrifice will save you all," what do you think their response should be? They should say, you could think they might say, "All right, well, if you need to die that we may live, then let's go ahead and do that." But this isn't their immediate response. Listen to what it says. it says here, but it says in 13, it says, nevertheless, the men rowed hard to reach dry land. It says, nevertheless, they're like, we can make it. We'll get there. There may be another way. There may be a way that we can fight the sea and we can row and we can row and we can get to dry land without you having to die for us. Like maybe we can do this on our own, right? And if this is a story of Jesus, if this is about Jesus being willing to die to pay our way and we can't fight our way through life, do you think they're going to succeed? I wouldn't think so. And it continues on, it says, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempest. You cannot fight your way through the sea of life to get to eternity, to get to heaven. There's not another road besides the death of Jesus to get you to eternity. You can't row your way there. You can't fight your way there. You can't battle the sea. You cannot do it on your own. You'll find yourself lost and there will be no way. And it says here in verse 14, then they called to the Lord. And it says, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life." And they said, let not his innocent blood be upon us. And it says, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. Now there is tons in that passage that we're just going to kind of graze over and come back to later. But they realize, finally they're like, okay, we have rowed until we can row no more. And now we realize, Lord, the only way is the death of this one person. That's the only way we can do it. They've hit the end of their rope, right? They're like, all right, okay. They fought, they tried their way, and they were unsuccessful. Now, as we look at these things, sometimes I wonder, a lot of times I feel like I'm trying to prove a point or trying to give you more grounds for why I feel this is right. So you could look at an Old Testament story like this and you could say, well, maybe you're not supposed to see it that way. Maybe, and that's true, right? Because who am I to tell you that this is a picture of trying to reach heaven, right? Like, how do we know for certain? But I want to show you a pattern of the Bible. I want to show you a pattern of the Old Testament. And I think this is cool because just a couple of weeks ago, I just happened to be reading in the Psalms, and I came across Psalm 107. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. If that's not the story of Jonah, and if that isn't giving us the answers to what they were doing rowing that boat, I don't know what does. But anyway, as we look at this, I want to start off in Psalm 107 and verse 4, and I want to give you an idea of what this psalm is about, and then I want to show you why I feel it applies to Jonah. So it starts off here in verse 4, and it says, some wandered in the desert. And it says, in that wasteland, finding no way to a city to dwell in. And so when you think of this, now again, I view the Old Testament as kind of piles and piles of riddles, okay? And all of these riddles seem to pile up to who is Jesus and how do we be saved. So as we're looking at this, if we are looking at this psalm as a form of a riddle, what does it mean when people wander in a desert wasteland and they can't get to a good city? Like, my mind immediately thinks, we struggle through life. And we can't get to a perfect place to live. We can't get to that great dwelling place. We can't get to a place of peace without hardship unless we turn to Jesus. That Jesus will take us to a heavenly dwelling, a good and peaceful place. And this is what I think of in my mind. And then it says, as they're out there struggling in verse 5, it says, hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. So as they're struggling to get to a city, they're like, we can do it, we can make it. We can't go on any longer. They're fainting. They're tired of trying it their own way, right? And then it says, and then they cried to the Lord. And in their trouble, he delivered them from their distress. And, as we look at this, I just wanted you to see what this psalm was about. It was about trying to get to a good place on your own, trying to make it there on your own, and then finding out, you know what? It took a little bit of life's hardship to find out, I better call out to God. Like, I tried it my own way and things were difficult, but eventually I needed to call out to God. And I want to look at one more illustration as we look at the psalm in Psalm 107 verse 10 as it continues on. And it says, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this to buzz through to get to the part that has more application, but I want to just show you this. It says, some sat in darkness, and then 11 it says, but they rebelled against the way of God and against his words. It says that they didn't want to follow God, and they were in this dark place, but they didn't want to go God's way. And it says, then it says in verse 12, and I'm kind of skipping through quickly here, but it says, then they fell down with none to help. They tried, And then they fell down and like, we can't do it. We have tried this life and it was hard and it was difficult and we wanted to do it all ourselves, but we just can't do it. They fall down and no one can help them. And then, finally, and then they called to the Lord in their trouble and he rescued them. So do you see how the layout of this psalm is what? It's the layout of this psalm is they try and they struggle and they fall down exhausted and realize, I'm going to need to call out to God in this life, right? I am going to look to God to bring me through to a safe place. So as we look at this, now I want to get to the part where I think this, now that you know the theme of this psalm, now that you know the theme of this psalm, I want you to look at what it applies to Jonah and see if you think this tells us the story of Jonah rowing in this boat. And see if you think this gives strength to what we're supposed to see. Like if the story of Jonah is this puzzle or this riddle, and we're supposed to see what does it actually mean, tell me if you see the meaning in this psalm. It says here in verse, and again, in verse 14 through 22, it gives more illustrations, the same illustrations, but this is the last illustration I want to look at in verse 23. It says, some went down to the sea in ships to do business on the great waters. Now, we already looked at some things, and that was that the Old Testament keeps saying that the seas and the oceans, they're like where the men, the children of this earth, do their business, and they're like it's all about this earth and money and greed and riches and things, right? And we looked at that last week, but it says some people went down to the sea, they went down to their ships to do business, to do their thing, to work their job, to live their life upon the sea. And it says that they saw the deeds of the Lord and the wonders of his works in the deep. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. But they go down to do business on the sea. But as they're doing their business, their job, they're working, they're trying to make a living, they're fighting against the wind and waves of the sea, working to make their way in their life, their way, but somewhere inside they know that the workings of God are amongst them. Somehow as they're living their life, they're like, you know what? I know there is a God. And I know that his workings are here too, but I'm ignoring them. I am living my life upon this sea, but I know that the workings of God are here. It says they're aware of that thing. And it says, and then it continues on in verse 25. And it says, for God, it says, for he commanded the storms and the wind of the sea that they were lifted up the waves. So God brings hardship as they're trying to do their business in their lives. And what is it? Just like in the case of Jonah. It's wind and storms and waves as they're trying to live their lives. And it says they mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. And it says their courage melted away within them. And it says in their evil plight. Now this is where I say I think we see clues that tell us that it's more than just doing business on the sea. It says in their evil plight. So why was it that working their lives away at the sea was an evil plight? It's because they're working for themselves and they're denying God in their lives. As they're laboring in their day-to-day jobs, they're trying to push through and do everything their way, but they're finding at the end they know they're denying God and they want to do things their way or it would not be an evil plight. That their fight against the sea to make money, to work and do it how they want to do, actually is resisting God's way. They really don't want to do things God's way, do they? And it says, this is how hard they struggled in verse 27. It says they reeled and struggled like drunken men. And it says until they were at their wits' end. It says they fought the sea and they tried to fight the storms. They tried to fight the wind and the waves. And this illustration is as if you're in a boat in life. And it's like you're rowing and you're trying to get through your job and your work and you're trying to do the things of your life that you want to do it your way. And as you're struggling, it's like you're battling this wind and this raging sea of life. And it's like you have hardships and things break down and things that you worked for crumble beneath you. And you have people who get sick and they die in struggles and you're just like, I'm trying to get through life. But I don't really want to just turn and live for God and say, God, I'll just live for you and your way. I'm going to keep fighting. And it says they fight to work their job and their business until they're at their wits' end. They're like, I just can't go on. I can't fight the sea any longer. I can't work against it another day. And it says, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. Finally, after trying to do it their way, resisting that what they know God would just have them live for him, They say, no, 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 we'll fight the sea, we'll fight it, we'll fight it, we'll fight it. And finally, they're just like, I'm done. I am ready to just turn to God's way. Okay, God, I'm ready now. And finally, he delivers them from their stress. He delivers them from their ways. And listen to how closely this parallels the story of Jonah. It says, he made the storms be still and the waves cease. And it says that he brought the seas to a great hush. And you see how this is just like the story of Jonah. They're trying to paddle. They want to do it their own way. They're like, we'll make it to sea. But finally, they realize they can't do it. And when they call to God, when they do it his way, he calms the storms and the sea, which we saw last week was how God will calm the storms and sea of life that we are struggling against. And it says, then they were glad when the waters were quiet, and it brought them to a safe haven and destination. Finally, when they turned to God, he would bring them to a safe destination. The people in Jonah's story, they wanted to fight the sea until they could get to a safe destination, a peaceful destination, but there was no other way outside the death of one. And it says, finally, when they surrendered to that, God would bring them to safety. That finally there would be peace in their troubled existence. Finally, they wouldn't be facing this raging world of raging waves. Finally, they would turn to God and do it his way. So it says here, as we kind of try to close this out a little bit, looking at Jonah, it says, therefore they called out to the Lord and said, let us not perish. And so just like in the case of Jesus, remember when the disciples were in the boat with Jesus and they called out to him like in Matthew 8:25, and they said, Lord, help us, we are perishing. Same thing with Jonah. And in the case of Jesus, we see the exact person who could bring them salvation. But in Jonah's case, they're like, okay, we will cry out to God, and we're like, we are ready to accept the sacrifice that you said was the only way to safety. We're ready to submit to that, right? And then it says this, they said, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. So realize what happened in the Old Testament. In this story, hundreds, almost 1,000 years before Jesus, we see that they make a serious admission. It would be only their salvation would come through the blood of one innocent man. And that would be the only way of salvation. Do you guys see what I see there? Like, how is this not? How are you? Surely you see it, right? It's the blood of an innocent man must die to calm and make it through the waves, to make it to safety, to make it to live. They must surrender to God's way. But they don't really want to do it God's way, but ultimately they decide there is no other way but the blood of one innocent man. And they said, let us not perish for this man's life. And so, and then they say, lay not on us innocent blood. And we think of Jesus, we know his blood was innocent. Remember in Matthew 27:24, how Pilate said, he washed his hands before them, and he said, let not this man's blood be upon me. He says, I am innocent of this man's blood, for he is innocent. He says, I don't want to be any part of shedding the blood of an innocent person. We know that Jesus was the only sinless person who ever was, because he came from God as an innocent man, and we see this all laid out in the story of Jonah. Who must we turn to as we struggle in life, and when must we surrender that we may have salvation? When we turn to the blood of one innocent man. So, and the one last thought I had also with this is that in Luke 22:42, they say, we don't want the shedding of this man's blood. They say, if there's any other way, they say, Lord, it has pleased you. It says, Lord, you have done as it pleased you. They said, don't put this man's innocent blood on us. But they said, Lord, if there's no other way, do as it has pleased you. They said, this isn't how we would wish there was another way, but being as there is no other way but the blood of one innocent man, do as it has pleased you. And I think so much of Jesus as he prayed in the garden, Luke 22:42, he says, Father, if you're willing, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. If it can only be through the blood of one innocent man, may it be done. That the whole world would surrender to one way, that there is only one way, that one man must die for the sins of the world, that Jesus became man and came down and paid for our sin. And it says, the last thing here, it says, so they picked Jonah up and hurled him into the sea, and the sea quieted its raging for them. So as we think of this, and as we go out this week, I just want you to realize some of the greater imagery in this. That here are people who hear the message of salvation so long ago in a hidden way, in a hidden form, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus. And it shows their reaction. They say, no, 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 no. I'll fight life's raging storms. I'll battle those waves of the sea. I'll make it my way. I'll do it my way. This sounds like my kids, right? Probably me too, right? I'll do it my way, my way, my way, right? And they want to do it their way, but can we win? Is there any victory in it? There will be no entering into peace. There will be no calming of the storm until we look to God. Until we say, until finally, in our exhaustion, we look up and say, God, everything I thought this world was going to be pleasing, I thought I was going to make enough money that I'd be happy, and I thought I was going to marry someone who would just make me happy, and I thought I was going to get this money that would make me happy, and I thought I was going to find that house that just made me happy, and I fought the raging storms, and everything keeps falling down around me, and I wanted a place of peace, that you would bring me to a place of safety, and finally, I'm ready to say there's only one way. I will turn to the one sacrifice, that Jesus has shed his blood for me. And I will live for that day, for that eternity. And then I will find peace. And I will be brought into a safe haven where I will be in perfect peace. Where I will find the city I've been seeking, right? And I hope that you see it there in this story. And I hope that you can see the pointlessness of their fighting against the raging storms of life. There's no point in fighting it. Eventually you must find exhaustion and say, honestly, this life, and you realize they're fighting an evil plight. I'm sorry, I tried to close this out, and here I go. One last point. They're fighting an evil plight. That shows that there must be a turning of heart, right? They want to live for the world. They don't want to change their ways. There must be a surrender of fighting for this life and this world and all the greed that they want in it, and just letting go a little bit and turning to a godly plight, that they would live for the things of God and follow his way. So let's go ahead and close in prayer this morning. Our God and Father, I just pray that you just help us to see the things that you've hidden in the Old Testament so long ago, the things that people would struggle to find a way besides the one and only true way, that people would... You know, Lord, you saw in your foreknowledge that we would seek to make a living on the sea of life, that we would seek to battle against the world, to make our own happiness, to find our own peace, Lord, and that we would find it to be exhausting and tiring and a letdown, and that this world is so full of curse and death and dying, and that there is no peace and there is no calm from any storm outside of the one way through Jesus Christ, that we would be brought into a heavenly place, that we would look not at this earth, but we would look up to heaven, and that we would be brought into a safe harbor where we could be forever with you in a place that is only good, that is the only one way that Jesus provided through his death, as he died, as he was lifted up, and as he was the sacrifice that brought many to salvation and calmed the storms of life, Lord. And I just pray that you just help us to surrender to you and just help this message to be meaningful to us. And I pray this in your Son's name. Amen.